Here we go. All right. Hello, hello, and welcome to TalkFlock, our bi-weekly living room salon without the living room. I'm Jerry.
And I'm Anna. Every 2 weeks or so, we invite two friends from various fields to give brief but brilliant talks online of topics of their choosing.
These talks can be scripted or unscripted,
lecture or performance,
about anything or nothing at all.
Our goal is to let people and ideas meet together in this digital non-space.
And seek new possibilities for encounter, wonder, serendipity, and engagement.
Tonight, our talkers are Kelsey, Woida, and Joe Kai. They'll each deliver 20-minute talks.
After which we'll open up the floor for Q&A and discussion.
We do hope the discussion gets lively. This is our digital, or your digital space as much as it is ours.
We'll listen, we'll talk, maybe we'll disagree a bit, maybe we'll figure some things out.
Maybe spiral into deep, productive confusion together.
Fingers crossed.
I know that we're gathered from different places, though mostly California and New York, or the East and West Coast. But I would like to acknowledge that Jerry and I are speaking to you. Well, Jerry is speaking to you from the unceded land of the Lenape people, or the Mohawken people. And I am speaking to you from the unceded land of the Ohlone peoples. We would not be here today without the genocide and the systemic exclusion of Indigenous peoples. Can we all take a breath together to offer acknowledgement and deep gratitude to these people and this land? This acknowledgement is a first step towards a lifelong fight to dismantle the legacy of settler colonialism and white supremacy. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Anna. So a couple of points of Zoom ticket before we begin. First, please keep yourself muted during the talks and the discussion portion unless you yourself are talking. Even a little bit of background noise can mess up the sound for everybody. So maybe now is a good time to do that. Second, video is totally optional. It is really lovely to see your lovely faces, but absolutely no pressure to be on camera. Third, we are recording tonight's session for archival purposes. Feel free to turn off your video if that makes you uncomfortable, and feel free to reach out to me or Anna if that worries you for any reason. And fourth, this is the chat box. We invite discussion in here as well as over the microphone, so feel free to use it as you see fit. That just about does it. Anna, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce our first talker.
All right, so our first speaker is a person who has been my friend since I think I was 13. She is an incredible worker of this world who has she's like one of those people that really lives her values, and I've always looked up to her because she's always doing the hard work that a lot of us feel too exhausted or unable to do. I've seen her grow so much from social work school, where she was working in prisons, to now her incredible abortion access work. I've also seen her swim in a million oceans. I've seen her sleep on trains, traveling. I've seen her make like rigatoni in the middle of the night at a sleepover. I've seen her in many points in her life, and I'm so proud of everything she does, from shaving her dog to her day job. Without further ado, Kelsey, Woida.
Hi, everyone. Can folks hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you, Anna. That was like genuinely one of the nicest introductions I think I've ever received. So I feel very welcome to this space. I'm really excited to be here. It's so lovely to see so many familiar faces and also so many new ones. I'm hoping I can keep some of this natural light and will just like descend into darkness, and then I'll have to turn on my lamp. But I'm in Philly, and tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the connections between bail funds and abortion funds. I organize with my local bail fund here in Philly. I mostly answer calls and requests that come in on our hotline. And I used to volunteer on the hotline at my local abortion fund as well. I don't do that anymore, but I do organize with abortion funds around the country on their advocacy campaigns through my like day job. So I think that bail funds and abortion funds share a lot in common, both when it comes to strengths and challenges. And this is by no means going to be a comprehensive overview of anything, but just rooted in my experience and observations. But I'm definitely not an expert, and I'm still learning. And I guess, yeah, I just wanted to highlight a couple of elements that bail and abortion funds share, and mostly like their political orientation and analysis, how they do the work they do, and how they work to build collective power. So both abortion and bail funds have really emerged out of community needs and in response to racist policies and systemic discrimination. Abortion funds were really organized in resistance to the Hyde Amendment, which the Hyde Amendment isn't a law. It's a chunk of bad language that's added to the budget every year in Congress since 1976, which also means that every year Congress has the choice and option to not include it, but they do. And it essentially blocks Medicaid and public insurance from covering the cost of abortion. It was really specifically designed to keep abortion out of reach for poor people after the 1973 victory of Roe v. Wade. So they didn't waste any time. They immediately rushed to start trying to chip away at the legal right to abortion, knowing that blocking access for a lot of people would make it kind of meaningless. There's like literal footage you can watch online of Henry Hyde, the Congress member who this is named after, on the House floor, like talking about how he really wishes he could ban abortion for everyone, but since he can't, he'll just go after poor people. It's like very disgusting. And because of other racist barriers in our healthcare system and how people even get insurance for the most part through employment in the US, the Hyde Amendment disproportionately impacts women of color, young people, immigrants, queer people, and families that are already struggling to make ends meet. Similarly, bail funds are stepping up to try to fill the gap of need that's created by our cash bail system, which basically makes a two-tiered system of justice where if you're rich, you can buy your way out of jail, and if you're poor, then you're stuck in jail. The cash bail system also disproportionately impacts almost the very same people that Hyde does. Like if it was a Venn diagram, they'd almost just be like one overlapping circle. So it also disproportionately impacts women of color, people of color, Black people specifically, young people, immigrants, queer people, and people who are poor or struggling to make ends meet. Both cash bail and the Hyde Amendment are like tools of white supremacy, and both bail and abortion funds are aiming to just burn them down completely. The funds know that while we advocate and push for the structural change we want to see and to build the world that we dream of living in, it's still really important to redistribute money to the people most impacted by those systems in the current moment. So people stuck in jails and people who are blocked by anti-abortion restrictions from getting the healthcare they need. But bail and abortion funds are also trying to build movement power so that we can actually arrive at that future that we dream of. And that's a future that doesn't have bail and abortion funds. So they're, really thinking about how communities deserve better than relying on strangers opening their wallets every once in a while in support of their freedom. So both are really active in advocacy work. At my job, I partner with abortion funds that are building campaigns to create municipal funding streams for abortion. So the idea there is that even though the Hyde Amendment blocks federal Medicaid dollars from paying for abortion, and most states also block it, there are sometimes moments of wiggle room where we can create alternative funding streams in our city council budgets and our county health budgets to actually pay for abortion directly. Last year we had 2 victories. The Austin City Council funded abortion, and the New York City Council, so yay. And hopefully there will be more to come. Based on my experience on the hotlines, I would anecdotally say too that many people who call the abortion fund have experienced incarceration directly. A lot of people learn that they're pregnant when they're booked in jail because they give everyone a pregnancy test, at least in the women's prisons, and that might be the first time they've been able to access a test. And if they haven't directly experienced incarceration, oftentimes the other person involved in the pregnancy might be incarcerated, or their male partner or the father of their children might be incarcerated, which could actually be the very reason why they can't afford their abortion if they're trying to raise money for cash bail or surviving on one income. And similarly, folks who are in prison want and need abortions, and they're disproportionately parents who are incarcerated. So all of these parents in jail also deserve to parent with the resources and supports that they need to raise their children. And that includes with access to reproductive health care and also safety from prisons. So when I think about all of this, the kind of bow that ties it all together in my mind is reproductive justice, which can feel like a big buzzword. I'm just going to touch on it briefly, but it has a very rich history. It's a framework that was invented in 1994 by Black women. And at the time, the mainstream women's rights movement, women's lib movement was largely led by middle class and wealthy white women who didn't represent the needs of women of color, trans people, indigenous people, etc. So Sister Song, which is one of the founding orgs of the reproductive justice framework, defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we do have in safe and sustainable communities. So in my mind, that includes being able to parent without the constant threat of losing a child to police violence. It includes being able to parent without the threat of prisons. And when it comes to abortion, it's about access that goes beyond the choice on an individual level. So, the mainstream reproductive rights movement for a long time has really focused on keeping abortion legal as an individual choice that someone makes with their doctor, which is really important and necessary, but it doesn't really go far enough because we know that even when abortion is legal, many women of color and many other marginalized communities can't afford it or can't travel hundreds or thousands of miles to the nearest clinic. And so Sister Song says there's no choice when there's no access. So both bail funds and abortion funds bring all of this political analysis and framework into the work that they do. So it really infuses everything they do, how they do the work, how we answer the phones on the hotline, who answers the phones, how we make decisions as a group, how we educate ourselves, and how we build power. I'd say that most bail funds and abortion funds think of themselves not as charities and not as transactional. So it's more than just money exchanging hands. It's really about consciousness raising and following the leadership of people with lived experiences. So people who have been incarcerated and people who have had abortions. Most abortion and bail funds are run by volunteers and rely on grassroots fundraising models, which means that sometimes we have to say no to people and we can't afford to pay everyone's bail and to cover the cost of everyone's abortion, which is part of the flaw of the design, right? We want to change the actual structures that create this need, knowing that there's no way we're going to be able to pay all of the bills that need to be paid, which can be really hard sometimes. But I think that the way that abortion funds and bail funds, at least in my experience, see through those challenges is by really holding close that we make those decisions in a way that tries to not replicate the harms of the system that created these problems. So for example, with the bail fund, we prioritize Black people. It doesn't mean that we don't post bail for white people, we do, and it doesn't mean we don't post bail for other people of color. But we do have like a central thesis of prioritizing Black people, knowing how the prison industrial complex has specifically targeted them. We also prioritize caregivers of all genders. So people might be really familiar or most familiar with like the Mama's Day Bailout, which is a campaign that was started a few years ago to really like drum up support and fundraise a bunch of money around Mother's Day to bail out Black mamas. And it's become like the biggest annual fundraiser for most bail funds across the country. But we don't just define mamas as people who identify as women or people who are assigned female at birth. We, know that gender nonconforming people are mamas in their communities. We know that non-binary people are caregivers in their communities, and trans people, and that they're like really essential to their communities, and they're also like the most likely to be left behind in prisons and harmed there. Another way that we try to not replicate the harm of the system when we're making decisions is that we don't discriminate based on people's charges. So we know that policing is unjust and targets and criminalizes certain people over others. So if you look at someone's court docket and see the charges, it doesn't necessarily represent what happened in reality. And it doesn't tell you the full story. And, we really, while we work through that with the people that we're connecting with on the inside and their support system on the outside, at the end of the day, if we only prioritized like certain charges or only paid bail for people with like quote unquote low level drug offenses or something like that, we really wouldn't make any dent in mass incarceration, because that's just like not the reality of how people are incarcerated. And then the last thing I'll say about how they work is that both bail funds and abortion funds provide other forms of support too, beyond money. So a lot of abortion funds will do things like diaper drives. They will give people formula. They'll provide childcare for free for folks who need childcare while they're getting their procedure or going back and forth to the clinic for their appointments. Transportation, hotels and lodging. If you have to travel really far away for your procedure, because your state doesn't have clinics or providers, and then you're also having to stay overnight and paying for a hotel and paying for food and a babysitter, and you're losing wages, like the bill adds up really quickly. So those are different things that abortion funds also help pay for. And then bail funds, we, at the bail fund I organize with, at least, we will refer people to mental health services and substance use treatment if that's something that they want. Legal hubs and defense support for their cases. We also provide rent assistance to folks who we've posted bail for, knowing that like those first few months out of jail can be really tough for people, and you're extremely like economically vulnerable. We buy bus passes for folks. So there are a lot of different ways that these funds show up for people beyond just paying that initial fee. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about tonight is something I'm still working through in my brain. But I've been thinking a lot in this moment about what accountability is beyond just saying you're sorry. And I think as a society, we love to talk about accountability, but we're not super practiced at like trying it out or talking about what it really means beyond a surface level. And I think that bail and abortion funds can offer a great model for how communities can start showing up and being accountable as a community, especially when systems are causing harm. And, when it comes to both interpersonal violence that happens between two people or systemic violence, sometimes we can't get accountability directly from the party that harmed us. And sometimes survivors of harm don't want to seek it out, even if it's technically available to them, especially on the state's terms or the system's terms. And either way, like, you can't force individuals or systems that have caused harm to be accountable. I think it's interesting that we use this phrase, like, hold people accountable, because accountability really at its core has to be self-motivated, I think. I don't think you can forcibly hold someone accountable without replicating, like, the prison system and carceral thinking. So I also think communities often have a role in the harm that was caused to people. Survivors of harm can feel like the trust and safety they may have previously had in their community is broken when harm happens. And communities can experience a lot of shame for, like, letting harm happen and not creating the conditions of safety that we really want to see. So I think as communities, we really have to reckon with these systems like prison and anti-abortion legislation and our healthcare system and all of these things that we may have directly benefited from or invested in knowingly or unknowingly over the years and over generations. It's definitely easier to look away than to try to enter some sort of accountability process, but I also think that's changing a bit, which is exciting, especially when it comes to bail funds and abortion funds. So I think that these funds really offer us, like, an opportunity to show up and invest in the needs of people who are harmed by these systems, and that this is, like, the beginning of a redistribution of wealth and attention as an investment. Both types of funds really work to center the stories of the people who call them, which can reduce stigma and help people not feel isolated or alone in their experience, but actually connect the dots that, like, the harm they've experienced is intentional and designed by policy and systems, and we can change that. And, you know, just really listening to people and treating them like the experts of their own lives can be a powerful step toward healing. And I think that both in my experience with the bail fund and the abortion fund, to varying degrees, both try to really welcome the people who call them into community and into organizing with them. So with the bail fund, for example, we have regular community dinners where we invite everyone we've ever posted bail for, and they're allowed to bring their whole family and their community to really, like, connect. And we have open meetings where people we've posted bail for can attend and get directly into, like, decision-making processes with us. And we do follow-up and support check-ins. And we also always pay storytellers for their time, which is also, like, a really important thing. I think the beauty of, like, this grassroots fundraising model, while it's flawed because it still relies on capitalism in a lot of ways, it's also this really cool chance to see this, like, bigger amoeba or network of people who are usually donating on average, like, $5 to $20. Like, the donation averages for a lot of abortion funds in particular, and bail funds too, are, like, things that you don't think when you're paying them are going to make a huge difference. You're like, okay, I'll give $5. But somehow that gets us to millions. And I think that that's really powerful, and it's a really big demonstration of how communities can take care of people and maybe start the beginnings of community accountability. There's, like, a popular thing that I feel like is said in a lot of spaces that's really cheesy, but it's true. And it's that, like, those closest to the pain are closest to the solutions, or those closest to the pain are closest to the power. And I guess I just want to end by emphasizing that, like, we need these people who are stuck in prisons, and we need people who get abortions home and safe, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we actually need them, and they're, like, critical and necessary parts of their communities and our larger community. Our freedom is really dependent on one another, and they have more of the answers in how to end these cruel systems than anybody. And we know, like, if anyone's bodily autonomy or dignity or power is being denied or questioned, like, we all lose at the end of the day. Yeah, so I just rambled, and I'm not used to hearing myself speak for that long, this is an experimental talk for me. But also because I'm a nerd, and it's really hard for me to know that we can't spend, like, more time honoring all the amazing work that's happened and been led by people who've had abortions and people who have experienced incarceration, I did make a little reading list in case anyone wants to dig in deeper, which I can share. And I also probably should have said this at the beginning, so I apologize, but I just want to acknowledge that I'm white. I've never been incarcerated. I've never had an abortion. I see myself as a co-conspirator in this work, and I'm just forever indebted and grateful to all of the leaders and people who have taught me and continue to teach me and who have called me into accountability, which is also a lifelong process. So yeah, thank you all so much for listening and being here, and I'm excited to chat more.
Wow, thank you, Kelsey. That was really wonderful. I learned so many things. We're not gonna take a lot of space right now to talk about this, but if anyone has any clarifying questions, like things they would like to be defined or something they found confusing, you're welcome to ask them before we move on to the second speaker. Also, Kelsey, is your reading list like a Google Doc or something? Because you can post that in if you'd like.
Yeah, I made a PDF with a public link in my Dropbox, so I can send PDF, but I can also put the link here.
Thank you so much. I look forward to that. Does anyone have any clarifying questions?
I do. I think she said there's a video of Hyde talking and saying, where I'd like to get the link to that.
Yeah, I can definitely find that and share it.
I thank you.
All right, if we don't have any other clarifying questions, we'll be able to discuss more after. So thank you so much, Kelsey. And I'll let Jerry introduce Joe.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kelsey. That was totally wonderful. So it is now my pleasure to introduce a real garbage person. That's such a joke. My dear.
I love trash. I've been listening to a lot of Oscar the Grouch recently.
So Joe has 13-month-old twins. Not just listening to Oscar the Grouch on spec, although if you were, that'd also be cool. So Joe is an old and very dear friend of mine. We met in the parallel universe that was our former lives as traveling a cappella singers in college, which is very strange mode of existence. And so we spent a lot of really wonderful time in long car rides together and long rehearsals together and long conversations late into the night. And I feel very blessed and honored to have Joe as a friend and a person in my life, and to watch him grow as growing into his own as a musician. From the first time I met him, I knew he was an incredible singer and has such a sharp ear and such a sharp inner and outer ear of what he wants musically. And watching him bring that music into the center of his life and share it and make such joy has been really fabulous and inspiring to see. Joe's music is like Joe. It is omnivorous. It is pulling from lots and lots of different excellent influences, and it's also joyful. It's both smart, but it's smart in the silliest, stupidest, funnest, cartoonist way. And it just feels good. I'm very, very pleased to hear what Joe is going to talk about, and he's going to play some music for us tonight. And I guess I'll just make the plug here. You should all buy his album because it's really good. We'll put a link on it in the chat. So please join me in welcoming the great Joe Kai.
Wow. Garbage. Hello. It's really awesome to be here. Fascinating talk, Kelsey. Thank you so much. There are all these like nuggets of wisdom that I feel like I'm processing, and they're bouncing around inside my brain right now. And I wrote them down so that I can dwell on them. I don't have too much of an outline. I guess I'm gonna introduce myself. I'll play a little something. And then I've invited a bunch of Asian American artists and people that I really respect to participate. And basically, like I really have a lot of questions and I have very little time because of twins. So this is my opportunity to bounce ideas off of these wonderful artists in a space that is created for me. And so, yeah, and then after that, I would love to do some kind of collaboration with these people. So my name is Joe Kai. I am an immigrant. I moved here when I was 6, and I from Korea, and I taught high school English for about 4 years after graduating from college, and then decided to hell with it, and I'm gonna do what I love, which is music, which is why I'm here. Right now, I'm thinking a lot about race. I took a lot of ethnicity, race, and migration classes, and it's something that I've always been really interested in. But I think this is a time where, there's, I think a lot of the revealing of racism and the systemic racism is far more widespread than perhaps, in a classroom full of 13 really progressive people who like want to analyze culture and criticize it. Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot also about being Asian American. What does that mean, and how do I exist? Obviously, on a plane of alliance with those that are oppressed, but also find a language and a culture and an artistic expression that is particular to my experience. And it's been hard to do. Specifically, I think one of the things that I am really proud of, and one of the things that I've been listening to a lot, is Korean folk music. And this is something that I would not have been caught dead listening to as a child, growing up. Even my parents didn't listen to it. For just a really brief history, 1908 till end of World War II, Japanese colonization of Korea, which of course was funded and trained by Western imperialists. And then after that, we had the Korean War, in which the United States and Soviet Russia decided to have a pissing match on the Korean Peninsula. They divide this country into 2 different sections, and then to each of these split halves, they throw money and business, as well as language and religion, or the absence of religion in the case of Soviet Russia, as well as the kind of eradication, I think, of a lot of cultural roots that existed. So for me, even growing up, being proud of, showing how proud I was as a Korean in the 90s and 2000s and perhaps in the 2010s was like showing how modern and westernized Korea was. Like, oh, like we have really great electronics. Like, do you guys know Samsung? Like, come on, man, Samsung's from Korea. And I think even if you go to Korea, that would be the thing, right? Is showing pride through the language of I think Western hierarchy. But one of the things that I've noticed in the past 5 years in Korea and Korean culture, and even in Asian America, is the expression of pride through the re-embracing of pre-colonial culture. And that to me is beautiful, because if I played a pentatonic, Asian melody growing up, if I had expressed that at school or really anywhere, immediately that would have signified a caricature that only serves as comedy for white America. And so, yeah, I was taught from a very young age, both implicitly and explicitly, to bury that. That's why, there are a lot of, I guess this may be a stereotype, but there are a lot of Asian Americans in classical music. And I think that was one of the ways that Asians and Asian immigrants sought to enter into Western culture, was to deny their roots and to enter into a moneyed art form that had a lot of cultural cachet. Yada yada. Okay, I'm gonna play some stuff, and instead of any of the stuff that I normally would play to like make people happy, fuck you, Cherry. Sorry for the swears. I'm gonna play something on my violin that I feel is a regurgitation or an exploration of some of the folk things that I've been listening to. So yeah. Nice. Great. Thank you. Thank you for having that space. Okay, so this is great. Now we get to the meat of the thing. I was talking to Jerry about this talk and kind of how we would organize it, and one of the things that he was talking about was decentralizing whiteness. And I think in any of these conversations, I'm an educator, right? So I'd be like, well, like, let's talk about Asian American identity. And it would be very much addressed, I think, to the people that I think are not familiar with my identity. And perhaps I think that would benefit from this conversation. But instead, what we decided is for these 10 minutes, I invited specifically a handful of Asian American activists and artists as well to participate. So for those Asian Americans in the audience that would like to participate in the conversation or not, it'd be awesome for me to ask you some questions, and we'll just kind of talk for about 10 minutes or so, because I have a lot of questions. I have questions, and I would love to get your opinions. So yeah, unmute yourselves, because y'all are beautiful.
That was beautiful, Joe. I just want to say that was like an emotional thing to watch. I really appreciated that.
Thanks, Jenna. I appreciate you. Yeah. Okay, so how do we, is there a way to, there isn't a way to organize by people who are unmuted, right? Probably not. That's cool. That's not necessary. I could do speaker view. That makes sense. Okay. So I'll just kind of go for it. One question I have is, how are you feeling given the protests around America's racism? And I guess to start off, for me, it's been heartening to see, and it's also wonderful to see kind of the young wave of Asian Americans who are seeing Black and brown people as allies instead of needing to convince them that that is the case. I'm heartened by the knowledge around the model minority myth and how that stereotype in and of itself has been used against us to keep us apart, but also has been used, was specifically formulated in the civil rights movement to divide Asians from Black and brown people so that we may not get too much power. So that's one thing that I've been heartened by. I'm also like confused and sad because it seems to me a very binary conversation. And from both, I think, Black American folks, as well as white American folks, there's a sidelining that I'm feeling that I'm not sure how to digest. And sometimes it's good to be sidelined. I mean, that's a good thing. That can be a good thing.
Yeah, I guess I have felt a lot of different emotions, a lot of, I think, like confusion that comes up from the tensions that we've seen in the United States because of color lines. The Asians are called like the fulcrum, that has to do with that division between whiteness, white supremacy and anti-Blackness. Asians are very much that fulcrum. And I think that right now, I'm like you, I feel really hopeful by the Zoomers, especially the Zoom generation, the Gen Z. I'm just like, wow, you guys are so many steps ahead of where, me, an elder millennial, was when I was your age. And so I'm glad to see that conversation has progressed in ways that I couldn't imagine back when I was like 20. But I will say that the feelings of, oh man, how much our Asian community, whatever that means, it's so loaded, that term. It is difficult to watch us not move past the tensions that have historically happened between the Asian and the Black community. I just think so much of when I was growing up and when I was a child, that's when the Rodney King riots happened, and my parents had to explain to me what I was seeing between this Korean community that looked like me and then the Black community, and I didn't really understand. I understood that we were kind of like separated between like white people and non-white people, but then I had a hard time understanding when I saw this tension happen. And then so I guess that's the part that's a little disheartening, but I'm hoping that maybe there's a way that this is opening up a conversation amongst younger people, younger Asians especially, to decide to push against the older generation and to challenge that narrative that like we will always not get along. It's so there's hope. Disheartening. That's just sort of how I've felt for the last few months.
Mm.
I think that as Gen Z, this is my roommate, by the way. I agree with that. There's a lot of tension and difference between, for example, me and my parents being immigrants from the Philippines. They moved here to Portland just 2 years before having me. They don't quite understand the experience of growing up in America as a person of color, as a young woman of color. And so whenever I talk about experiences that I may have or experiences that my friends who are Black have, it's not something that they can really wrap their head around because they grew up in a colonial mentality in the Philippines. They just, all eyes were on America, and everyone was bleaching their skin. And if I were to visit the Philippines now, they'd think I'm really dark. And so, yeah, there is such a big difference between like my parents' generation and our generation. And I think that these protests coming up is a great way for us young people to show that we do know what's going on and we do understand that there are flaws in the system, and we want to change that. We want to change the next generation that we'll be living in and the next generation that we'll be raising. And we don't want it to be how it is now.
And I think to follow what she's saying, to give some history on colonial mentality, the Philippines was colonized, I believe, in the 40s by America. And when that happened, they in America came to the Philippines and claimed that land. They brought their slaves with them, and they said, "You don't listen to us. This is going to be you. You want to look like
they're not even the same race."
And the
they all have masks-ons and they have like similar hair.
And the propaganda and the things that were sent over to the Philippines really washed out the culture of the Philippines, which I have been like really longing to learn more about, because what my family who's alive has lived right now was everything after we were colonized. And it's hard because I see where my grandparents, it doesn't click because they were taught, you know, to just look up to American culture. Like I've seen old newspapers where they say the Americans are heroes, they're saving us, they're bringing in food, they're bringing in goods, they're bringing in what we need, but they brainwashed us. And I have a different experience than Janelle. We're both 19, and her parents came here when she was 30. My father came here when he was a teenager. So I've really been blessed with having a father who grew up also as an American. And we really have shared our experiences in that and what those differences are. Being American or being Filipino in America, he married a white woman. So then that always has its like ties between when we go back to the Philippines, what that's like. But I think as far as here, it's like when I talk to my grandparents about the things that are going on, my Filipino grandparents, my Lolo and Lola, it's a difficult conversation because they actually just texted me the other day as being like, "Hey, what's going on in Portland? What is going on over there?"
Sure.
And I have to text them and I have to say, the people of Portland are peacefully protesting because our community is hurting right now.
Sure.
And as they're peacefully protesting, the Trump administration has brought in state troops to riot against us. And me and Janelle have both actively been participating in the protests. We haven't recently because we had a COVID scare, so we're staying home. But it's hard.
Yeah.
I'm very American. American. As much as I am Filipino, I'm very American. And because my grandparents don't live with me, it's hard to find a middle, but it's like I just have to speak to them nice. Like I have to speak to them and say, we share similar struggles with people of color, with Black people. We share these same struggles, not to that extent, but you have to see where your mindset is blinding you from what's really going on.
Right. Well, so my question is, so I think what I'm hearing from you is And I think what I'm hearing from Jenna too is that generational split, as well as the kind of separation with our home culture. I don't know if I should call it that, but like our ancestral culture. And that I feel like is also part of like unbelonging is such a huge part of my identity. And that I think is that you've just introduced a whole nother dimension of unbelonging, which is that, okay, like we're not white, we're not Black or Latino, and then we're also not from where we're from. And we're just kind of in this no person land. I guess, and so I think in the wake of that, I've been exploring my roots, but then also thinking a lot about creativity and Asian American art. And I know there are a lot of artists out there, and I'm kind of curious, what is Asian American art? I mean, Julie's here, and we've talked about this, like what is Asian American liturgy, like worship. But I'm curious, like what is Asian American art? Is there a place? I mean, I think we're creating it, right? Because we are, we are, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, I have so much gratitude towards Black art because it taught me how not to be white art, if that makes any sense. It gave me a language of rebellion, and it gave me a language of otherness that was filled with pride, and it was beautiful. And I guess I'm trying to figure out like how we can create that for Asian America. From the people who we haven't heard from yet, maybe.
Yeah, I guess I'll go. I mean, I think, I've heard so much. I feel a lot of this, being East Asian and being Chinese American. Both my parents were immigrants, so I'm like, I guess, second generation. And there is like, a really palpable sense of diaspora that I can't go back home to China because that's not where I was born. But then I'm also in some ways really displaced in this race conversation too. But I feel very strongly that our liberation is tied up with everybody's liberation. So it feels really important for us to be a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, about like supporting indigenous people. Like it feels really important to be a part of all of that. And I think as an Asian American person, I think we need to just do the art that feels truest to ourselves, because we have to constantly complicate the ways in which we're being forced to identify. Asian America as a monolith is problematic to begin with, and it was created by white supremacy to separate us. So I feel like the more that we do the art that speaks to ourselves, the better it is. I mean, that's what Asian American art is to me. And whether or not, white supremacy or this sort of like really messed up world validates us is not the point. I think we have to create the art that we need to. And it's easier said than done, right? Because artists need to get paid, and we need to be able to.
But even hearing that, like that just gave me, I mean, I had like a therapy moment there. Like you freed me a little bit, just you saying that, like you need to just make your art instead of like worrying about saving people. You know what I mean? Like it's so healing to take that pressure off of me.
Yeah, I'd like to think that our liberation ultimately at the end of the day is the idea that we are all thriving in the ways that we need to, which also means that we need to support other people's thriving, right? Like we can't always constantly be in this survival mode. So yeah, and that looks like just creating the work that we love, or creating the work that we feel like we need to, even if it's painful or complicated or doesn't seem like it makes sense to dominant culture, because we know that dominant culture doesn't work. It doesn't even work for white people, really. I mean, if we think about it, really, if you like break down white supremacy, it's not even good for white people. And capitalism is rampant all around the world, and
If I may just interject to just
Yeah.
add like one thing. Yeah, I love that idea too, because I was having a conversation with a white social activist, like ally, really lives his mission, and he was saying the same thing, that white supremacy is also bad for him. Like, he knows so little about roots. And one of the things that I've complained about just today is like, my roots were cut, right? And when African slaves were brought here, roots were cut. But I think that's the sad thing about white supremacy, is that a generation later, you're white, and it's so hard to like retain that cultural heritage. And because of white supremacy, when I'm on an airplane and someone starts talking to me about like their Viking ancestry, I'm like, ooh, like, yeah.
Yeah. And also to reconcile with the fact that your ancestry has been, colonizer cultures have caused a lot of harm. And I'm talking about Chinese people as well. Okay. Like, I don't know, China is hecka scary right now as a country, and has been in the past. And, Japan has colonized China and Korea. You know what I mean? It's just like all colonizer cultures, like, we need to reconcile with those pasts to make sure that we don't re-perpetuate and re-oppress each other in this spectrum of racial hierarchy that we all both, prescribe to, but like also how do we like break that down? And I think we do that, and we can do that as artists because we also are able to radically imagine differently. And I'm going to call out Daniel because Daniel shared out this really amazing artist manifesto that actually really spoke to that.
Daniel's like, what?
Maybe not. Remember, like, basically it's our work. We're called to do this work.
Oh,
yeah.
This is what we train for?
Yes, this is what we train for. That's the letter. Yeah.
Well, and piggybacking from Jenny and responding especially to you, Joe, thank you for inviting me here. And, I appreciate being part of this conversation, because even before 2020 happened, I've been beginning to investigate and unpack what it meant for me, because I'm a Korean adoptee. And so in terms of like being cut off from your heritage, I was raised by white parents. I was adopted when I was like 3 or 4 months old, and I was raised by white parents. And so right now, more than ever, have I been unpacking what that meant to be raised and indoctrinated in upper middle class white culture and all of the privileges that came with it, but also like experiencing all of the boundaries experienced and dictated by like how I looked in comparison to my context, and being just completely isolated without even, a parent to reference my experience with racism and white supremacy and anti-Blackness. I grew up in the first suburb west of Chicago. And so there was all kinds of racial awareness and a huge amount of anti-Blackness based on where I grew up because of the proximity to the west side of Chicago. And so one thing that I'm really holding on to in this period of time too is the power that comes with my proximity to whiteness. And as Asian Americans, as East Asian Americans, like, we have the closest proximity to whiteness in terms of people of color in the room, in an institutional setting, in settings of power, etc. So, just trying to tap into those access points in being able to have those conversations and step into that role instead of being sidelined. It's like we can't be just sitting on the sidelines right now.
Yeah, I've been thinking about fangs and like tiger fangs, and one of the things I've been like snidely saying at home is we've traded in our fangs for access to the white culture. Let's reclaim my fangs. Like,
I like that. And you know what else I like to talk about, Joe, is Han.
Yes.
Right, and this like residual burn.
The blues.
If you talk about of Korea being colonized and surviving basically the ancestral trauma, the intergenerational trauma of survivors.
Yes. And the Korean word for that is Han, if I may be educational for one brief moment. Yeah, it's kind of like the Korean blues. You know, we got the blues. Yeah.
I think Han is just one version of that complex fire that burns in us to prove ourselves wherever, especially as we are in America. I'm done.
And thanks for pointing out the East Asian part of it too, because like even just within East Asia, right? There are varying peoples, but then where East Asia is not Asian America. It's as Jenny was saying, it's not a monolith. Anyone else want to jump in that we haven't heard from yet, Asian American wise? Asian American wise. Yeah, Tom.
Hi. Sorry. Someone else want to go? Sorry.
Oh, I was bashing someone.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Julie. Eric.
Hi. Since you mentioned me by name, I felt very pressured to turn the camera on.
Oh no.
No. I did want to respond to the whole conversation around the Asian American worship, liturgy, and art making. I think I've been thinking a lot about oddly reappropriating the word appropriation, mainly because it's been used as so much as a curse word. But it's kind of odd because the idea that our locale and proximity doesn't influence the way that we create art is just a false idea. I'm an LA born and raised Korean American, and I'm very influenced. My ideas, my thoughts, the way that I create art is all influenced by my neighborhood and my locale. And I grew up in a predominantly Black and brown neighborhood all my life. And so the music that I heard on the streets is obviously going to influence the way that I think about creating art. And so I just feel like, I don't know if today's the day that we want to rethink appropriation, but I feel like I know, I'm not trying to reclaim that today, but
let's go
10 years from now or something. But the reappropriating the word appropriation, I just want to make that distinction between colonization and appropriation, because colonization is to take something and want to own it. Take something that wasn't yours and want to own it. And we've seen plenty of times that's happened many times throughout history. But appropriation is in a lot of ways what should have been the definition of appropriation is allowing the influences of my locale and my whatever is around me, the people group, food, all of those things, to influence me, and then for me to take that and then to insert my own story in that, you know what I mean? You tell a story. So it's like when you utilize jazz in your music, if we were to say that we needed to have a distinctive Korean American sound, we probably couldn't use your violin, because that would, it's like you couldn't use all of these things that you could, now you have reshaped to be Korean, distinctively you, Joe, music, which we're all grateful for and benefit from. And so it's like, I think there just needs to be some work around trying to kind of understand these nuances a little better. And so when I walk into spaces where they're asking for multicultural, and then they say, okay, so for Asian Americans, what do you guys have to give, to this? And it's usually a music situation, right? I sit there and I just get pissed, because what they want me to say is I have, when they think of Black, they think of Black gospel music, rap, and hip hop. And then they go to Latinx and they go, ooh, look at these samba beats and stuff, and then they come to us and they go whole tone scale. I don't know. Am I supposed to be do 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 do? Am I?
Yes.
you know, like chopsticks, like I don't know. And I hate that question because it's asking me to even like in a lot of ways orientalize myself and also that I can have something to bring to the table, whatever that is. And I just am like tired of that, you know. I'm very influenced by R&B and soul, and I'm not mad about it. But do I tell a different story, allowing those songs to like shape me? It's like music that emerged out of like discord and pain, which I can resonate with. Korean American, Han, I got it, you know. And so if it's an opportunity for me to share my own story of pain and resilience, using sounds that I heard in my Black and brown neighborhood, I think that works. That intersectionality, I think, is really key to the future of art and future of just all these race conversations. I wonder if there is a world where we can, I don't know if it's going to happen in our lifetime, but I wish that we were post-racial and I could be Korean American and not even like have to sit in the umbrella of Asian American, which, you know, truth be told, often ignores our Desi Americans, our brown Asian Americans get ignored on the reg, our PIs get ignored on the reg, because everybody assumes when you think about this race, it's yellow and it looks like me, you know? And so I just want to get past that somehow. Maybe art is the prophetic voice that we need to kind of push us and launch us forward. So like Joe, you start first. Okay, thanks. You start. You go, you know. You go.
Go off, Julie. Preach. Oh man. Woo. Woo. It's a little extra energy in there. Oh man. Anyone else? Yeah. If not, then I think we'll move to the next section here. That was great. Oh, I'm filled with so much joy. Thank you. Like, I mean, even just this conversation, the idea of having this in public with like non-Asian people, like that's like, I would never have done this even 10 years ago, maybe, you know. And for me to feel at least just internally, the personal kind of confidence and ability to have this conversation in front of all of you non-Asian Americans that are in this Zoom room is beautiful. And I'm really thankful for you listening and participating as well. I'm going to do just like a really quick jam for all the participants in the conversation, or I guess like Asian American identifying people. Do you just want to like write a word or a phrase or a sentence in the chat box? And then I'm just going to read them, but also make some sounds, and we're going to make some Asian American art right here, right now. Yeah. So I'm just going to start looping, write it down. We'll do like, I don't know, 3-4 minutes, and then we'll head out here, or head on to the discussion. Authenticity. We've stepped so far. Oh no, I went blues. I can't do that. I'm not allowed to do that. Authenticity. We've stepped so far. skeleton, experiencing the pain of white supremacy. Yonde, solidarity. Collective, collective liberation, 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 collective liberation includes our own. All right. Thank you all for participating. Y'all are beautiful. And sending it back to Jerry and Anna for discussion.
Oh my goodness gracious. Thank you, Joe. Thank you everybody for that amazing conversation. That was so cool. Let's give it up for Joe one more time. So at this point, we're gonna chat amongst the four of us, and then quite soon we'll open it up to the whole room. So if you have questions brewing, bring them to percolation. Anna, do you have anything to begin with?
Okay, well, there were a lot of threads from both of these conversations that I felt like connected. And one of them was this sort of mutual aid model of solidarity, not charity, or additionally, our liberation is dependent on the liberation of everyone. So I guess I had a question for both of you. Maybe Kelsey, what is the recent, do you guys know anything about the recent history of that model, or anything, any deeper history about that model? Sorry if I'm inarticulate.
I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about whether or not abortion funds and bail funds, I think they're mutual aid adjacent, and they exist in an orbit and universe of mutual aid, but they're still not quite there yet. Because when I think of mutual aid, I think of direct horizontal, mutual reciprocal power being shared. And I think that is what most abortion funds and bail funds are striving to achieve. But because of certain structures that have been in place, that it's not always as evenly flowing as mutual aid efforts that I see happening in neighborhoods all around me, where people are buying their neighbors' groceries and showing up at each other's doorsteps in a way that is maybe more collaborative. I think that there's definitely a political element to what bail funds and abortion funds are doing in the building power together part, but in terms of the actual aid, I think there's still stuff to chew on there. So I don't know if I can speak to it beyond that, but
one of the things that I've been fighting is, so I'm a board member at Bravo Youth Orchestra, which is an awesome music education nonprofit, delivers music education to mostly Black and brown kids in North Portland. and which is a historically underserved neighborhood, and also one that is being gentrified and colonized, as it were. And one of the things that we have to fight is saviorism, and I think this is kind of related to what you're saying. And I think there's such an imbalance of power that even those who do want to give and donate are doing so out of the magnanimous generosity of their awesomeness, and there's a real kind of like patting oneself on the back instead of reframing the conversation to know, like, remember when you took all of that from this group and therefore they are now destitute? Like, you giving is you like making, like, redeeming yourself for your sins. I mean, lest I get too religious there, but yeah. And so, and that conversation has to happen on the board level. I mean, I'm constantly, I've brought my fangs out, right, in the last year or so to really kind of challenge and challenge even how we're advertising or reaching out to donors about why they should donate.
I have like half of a question here, which maybe will become a full question by the time I finish speaking it. I'm thinking about this word Han, and thinking about, Joe, what you were saying about the cutting of roots, and thinking about whiteness as this kind of blankness, emptiness. It's like a lack of culture. And it's making me think about how a term like Han and the culture of the blues or Han or any of these cultures they're survival mechanisms, right? Like, as I'm understanding it from what you're saying, it's like Han is what comes out of hundreds of years of being colonized. The blues is what comes out of hundreds of years of being colonized. These are ways of remaining alive, and this exists in any culture. And it makes so much sense to me the way that dominant culture, hegemonic culture, would want to destroy that, erase that, make that inaccessible. And I guess what I'm interested in
or capitalize on it.
Yeah, thank you. I guess what I'm interested in is, like, thinking of that feels like very kind of big and abstract. And I'm thinking about that right now, trying to think about it on like the smallest grain of sand level, in terms of like, what tools are you both using to survive right now, to maintain your sense of self, maintain your sense of grounding? Kelsey, I was thinking about this listening to your talk of like, it's draining work you're talking about. Joe, what you're talking about is like draining emotional work. To even just like sit in those questions is very difficult. And so, yeah, what's giving you thread, grain, grounding?
I am ungrounded. Oh. I mean, having two twins, having one set of twins is grounding, if only because they are exhausting physically and mentally, and they consume so much time and space. I don't know. I think Han is. I guess, yeah. To kind of reflect it back to you, Han is exactly that, right? When I'm exhausted and feeling really sad, to tap into this acknowledged. Han is not only the blues, but it's understood as a communal kind of personality and identity, and it's the driving characteristic of Koreans that supposedly binds us together. And so, while it is in a confession of sadness, and as well as the echoing of traumas, it also is uplifting and ties us fiercely together. And so I think things like this, where, you know, I'm kind of building these communities and having conversations, these give me life. Yeah. Conversation with you that we had this morning, you know, it just, I think people whose spirit I recognize, and surrounding myself with these people, it feeds me. Yeah.
I'll just add, I mean, I think, Jerry, part of what you touched on in the beginning of your very real question, that was a full question, or became one, is like this idea of whiteness as emptiness. And I do think that a part of why white people colonize or appropriate other culture is because the cost of like buying into white supremacy was giving up our own cultural roots for power and dominance. And like, we pretend we don't have any culture of our own, and we erase our own immigrant stories and our colonizer stories because we've positioned ourselves as like dominant and therefore neutral. And it gets to the latter point of your question too, because I think because of that, we're also like less in the practice of grounding and also processing trauma and like grounding through that. And so it's like a practice that I feel like I'm still learning too, with myself and other white people, to not just be the like passive recipient of other people's cultural and like personal ability to do those things and to ground and for me to benefit from them, or to like process trauma and for me to benefit from it, but to also create my own pathways to doing that proactively. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do see like a lot of the work to me is filling my cup. But I also want to interrogate that and like, why? Like, is it because of my own, it's the space where I'm alleviating my own guilt. Yeah, but I do think like I get a lot out of struggling through this with others. And also taking like a very healthy dose of solitude all of the time to reflect on that, so as to not be like showing up and just perpetuating yucky things.
I wonder if either of you have questions for each other before we open it up to the larger room.
I just want to ask a really quick logistical question, which is, I felt like I read something about bail funds being returned, or I'm curious, can you just kind of, what happens to bail funds once they are given?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the whole point of cash bail is that it's collateral. You're paying the court as like a temporary hold, like a retainer, to say like, I am going to show up to court and like see this case through, so that you don't like run away, which is largely not a problem anymore. This came out of like really old American history where people would like, I guess, skip town. I honestly don't know how much that even happened, or if it was just part of the cultural myth. But like 94% of people show up to their court date, like, or something really like a majority of people do not need to be held on a cash promise that they will continue to see their court case through. But because that's the whole setup, the idea is that once you see it through, the courts will return that money to you. They do skim a lot off the top still for court fines and fees, which varies from city to city. Philly has like actually some of the worst and highest in the country. At one point it was like 30% they would take. So you would still only get like 70% of the money that you paid or your family or community paid back. But the idea is that it does to a certain extent regenerate. There are some cases where it doesn't, but most of the money that we put in, we get back. So that is like kind of this other interesting element of how the investment returns, and then we can post more bail for more people to varying degrees. I feel like I could ask you so many questions, Joe. I just really appreciate your creating such a like immersive experience for us, and also facilitating that conversation and for everyone participating in it. I guess I'm curious about how often that is a part, like if that's a regular part of your art making process, like being in dialogue with others throughout the process of making art, and dialogue with yourself and your identity like that, maybe in different ways, or in that very same way of like actual conversations with friends and other makers.
For sure. I think I overthink, and it's those little conversations that remind me stop thinking and just create, and let that creation be and breathe and exist. So yeah, I think it's pretty essential to having that. One of the things that I've been noticing is, because I'm not performing, I feel more free and just flexible, and I'm allowing myself more space to make things that I don't think is great. And that's been fantastic because it's leading to great things. Whereas when I'm thinking about the great thing and I'm like, no, this is not going to work, then I enter a state of paralysis. So yeah, I think conversations like these are really, it's inspiring and motivating. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question, which is, are your babies involved in your art making?
I have a whole voice memo playlist of stupid baby songs, but also really beautiful ones that I really enjoy. You know, like drink up my Junie, drink up for daddy, you know, drink up for all of the people you'll meet, et cetera, et cetera. Junie and Theo, Juniper and Theo. And yeah, so on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, there are many times when I just want to go downstairs and play something, just get this energy out, because it's so, hi, yeah, her, you know.
Awesome, thank you. We'd love to open the floor to whoever else has a question for Joe or Kelsey. You can, a question for each speaker. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask, or would you rather I read it? I will read.
Yeah, I can read them. Thank you to both speakers. There's so much to think about. But maybe these questions are, well, I'm hoping these questions compress some of that into something that will help me think about everything that's been said. So I have a question for Kelsey and a question for Joe. For Kelsey, are there restorative justice examples or models that you think are helpful for thinking about and initiating community accountability? And for Joe, have Hallyu and US reactions to it shaped or informed or further complicated your relationship to what you called your ancestral culture?
Thanks. Restorative and transformative justice are like areas of learning for me that I'm really excited about. And I think that everything I've been reading and learning, I'm just realizing is like way better to read and learn with other people. Like it is like an independent practice, but I also think it's inherently one that is about community and like understanding how we create safety with each other as people. It's something that we're actually talking about very actively with the Bail Fund right now as like our, kind of core group of organizers about how we practice accountability every day and how to like create opportunities to practice that before shit hits the fan and there's a conflict or a problem. I will recommend one book that I recently read, which I know is annoying. Like a book recommendation isn't one beautiful little nugget of an example. But I think part of what I was coming up against, this wall I was hitting, was like, I was like, yes, I'm down with restorative justice and this entire idea and framework, and everything I could find about it was like kind of talking about the theoretical model. And I was like, you're preaching to the choir. I'm here with you. I'm here for it. But like, I don't know what this looks like. And this book that I really appreciate that was just published this year is called Beyond Survival. I think it's called Lessons Learned from the Transformative Justice Movement. And it's like a collection of essays and pieces from, I think, over 30 writers who have experiences like leading transformative justice processes and community accountability processes.
Jenny has her copy right there. Sorry
oh my
for
gosh,
interrupting.
amazing. It's coming to you from outer space. That's beautiful. Yeah, I really appreciated that. I mean, I also, try to challenge myself to not always just jump to the like, well, how do I do it mode? But I do think it's really helpful to read examples of how people have like done it, how it's been successful, how it's failed, how, there are like learning points and growing points for that as a movement too. Like, I think it's still coalescing as like a larger movement. And for many generations, people have just been doing it without even calling it that in their own communities. So I would recommend that as a resource to check out for sure.
I really enjoyed what you were saying about accountability too, and the kind of internalness of that, and the need for that to come authentically from within. Hallyu is like it's known as is it the Korean wave, I think? But it's basically the kind of wave of Korean K-pop, as well as, Korean dramas, and kind of the cultural wave that has come from Korea. And I have a very complicated, really amazing question, and one that I'll have to think about later. But I have a complicated relationship with it, because to me, I see K-pop and I see maybe Korean dramas to a lesser extent, but I see the culture of the colonizer reflected back so aggressively in it. And to me, growing up watching Korean music videos of K-pop, they seemed kind of aggrandizing, deifying American mainstream pop culture in a way that didn't feel like it was necessarily adding something new. And also it felt like I was saying before, that it was about denying your roots, and it was about showing how Western you are. Like, well, I could sing something just like Britney Spears can. That was the first CD I bought with my own money. BT Dubs was that Britney Spears first album. So I guess I'm a hypocrite, but yeah, I think but then I'm seeing this thing where, K-pop artists are flooding the Dallas Police Department's like camera app, where you can like take videos of crime and send it in to the Dallas Police Department. And a bunch of K-pop stars started, they tweeted that out, and basically you had K-pop fans from all over the world just inundating this app with videos of them dancing to K-pop, which is hilarious. I think I still question what K-pop is selling. I think the overall message is akin to, I think, many forms of American pop, where they're just selling, period, rather than creating for the purpose of community. But yes, it is complicated by what I've seen recently, which is kind of, I guess, heartening to a certain extent. But you're not going to find me bouncing to K-pop probably anytime soon.
Thank you, guys. Does anybody else have a question for Kelsey or Joe, or for any of the other speakers who spoke tonight?
Jerry, you're wearing this shirt. Can I ask a question? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of jealous of your shirt, but I am also one of those people who has very mixed feelings about the term Asian, like every other Asian person I know. And I guess I'm curious from you about, how do you feel about, your Asian and identifying with that, you know, what is, it's so complicated, especially when I just think about like you and me, like I'm a Japanese person, and you know what? My country was horrific to your country, yet we're all needing to stand in solidarity in this country together. You know, and Asian is this European lens of looking at us, right? How do you wrestle with that as an artist, or is there like a Koreanness and an Asianness? I know it's like so loaded, all the things I'm saying, but I wrestle with that where I see the strength of Asian solidarity, but I also don't know how to be Japanese American sometimes like that. How does that work for you in your art?
Yeah, I guess I feel pretty comfortable interchanging those different levels of my identity, if that makes sense. I think the Koreanness is a very specific article of clothing that I wear and I feel really comfortable in, and growing more comfortable in some ways more so than the word Asian. I agree. But for me, this is an act of rebellion to wear this shirt. I would never have worn this shirt. In fact, my sister got me this shirt. And I've been wearing it so proudly just in the neighborhood, to walk around my Southeast Portland neighborhood wearing this t-shirt is, has been great. I don't know. It feels very liberating and slightly revolutionary. And I'm also pairing it, you know, with my socks that I bought from Kiriko, which is a Japanese American store here in Portland. And then I'm wearing these like, I hate the word harem pants because fuck harems and fuck Orientalism. But, you know, like I'm wearing like large voluminous pants that I bought from Nepal when I was there. And I'm decked out in all these kind of Asian things. And to me, I guess that's what I've been trying to embrace is like that Asianness is not a monolith, and the more that we can kind of share and borrow from each other, the better. In listening to Korean folk music, I feel like I had more of an education in like Indian raga music before I really fell in love with Korean music. So I've been talking with Sarish, who some of the a cappella people here know. He taught me so much about rag, and he plays tabla, and he got me to listen to so much wonderful music. And then I'm drawing connections about vocalizing in ragas and the actual like, oh, let's rest here, and how that is said. I'm just nerding out, but I guess I'm drawing these connections and finding these relative, like, you're my relative, you know, like you're my cousin, and I love being able to share aspects of little figments of our identity that I feel comfortable in. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Thank you.
I guess I have a question, but it's pretty heavy loaded. So ahead of time, thank you for sharing your vulnerability if you choose to. But I always have a hard time associating my identity from the identity that my parents want me to have as being in the nursing field or a doctor, a lawyer, or something. That's because it's something I want to be, but sometimes I have a hard time being like, wait, is that what you were taught to be? And I think it's like hard to know where to find my identity within that. And I'm just asking, what is that like for you guys, and how do you separate your own identity from your culture?
Anyone want to take that? I think for me, I mean, you know, it's our culture. I guess my parents are, in many ways, our parents are our window into what we perceive to be our culture. And I think it's a very limited window because my parents are highly educated individuals who sacrificed so much security, stability, and status to come to this country. And what do they want from us, for us? Like, they want happiness, and happiness to them is all the things that they sacrifice: stability, security, and status. And there are hella awesome Korean musicians, independent musicians that I'm meeting online that are living kind of this mirrored life of mine in Korea, and like they're not doctors or lawyers, and sure they may struggle with rent sometimes, but they're happy and they feel purpose driven, and they know that they can't not do what they're doing. But it's hard to push back against your parents in any culture or any generation, and then you add on to that the cultural difference, I think, and it's like the generational gap is hard enough, and then you add cultural divisions, and then it adds a whole nother dimensionality to parent issues, which, I mean, we have.
I think I just always want to carry on this legacy that my family brought here. And it's just like there's a lot of pressure to do that. And I know that like ultimately whatever we end up doing, it will be accepted, but like how myself am I going to continue this legacy that my parents have made in America?
The Godfather is an awesome book. It's by Mario Puzo. Maybe it's not that awesome, actually. It's fine. But there's a really cool phrase in the book, especially specifically, it's Italian immigrants, and they talk about, like, I'm a gangster now, but they don't talk like that in the book. But like, I'm a gangster now, but I want my kids to be doctors and lawyers, and then maybe their kids will be artists and like teachers. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like right now I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And even though that, my parents specifically have a limited view perhaps of their own sense of happiness, like I'm totally carrying on their legacy, and I'm making their sacrifice count by being exactly what I want to be, and giving back to myself, really. I mean, why did you sacrifice? You sacrificed for me to be happy, and I'm fucking happy, man.
Yeah, I want to add to your question, because I grew up also thinking that I was going to be a lawyer or a doctor. And it became very clear to me that I couldn't be a doctor because I was 13 and we were dissecting a frog, and it was the most horrifying thing to me. And I was like, oh, so I obviously can't be a doctor. So I think it's okay for you to want to carry your family's legacy, but then also find out as you go along in your journey that you might want to do something else, or that something else really lights your fire, or something else brings you a lot more joy or happiness, and that it's okay. And that, and so I think like giving yourself the opportunity to change and to grow and to evolve beyond your parents' narrative for you is also okay. And, I really love Joe's reminder that, we are our parents' wildest dreams, that they couldn't even conceive of us.
A little too wild sometimes.
Yeah, a little too wild. Yeah, my mom legit didn't even know that I was an English major. Like, I graduated, she was like, wait, what are you studying again? I was like, Mom, I'm a writer. And it was, but and now that I'm older, I realize that my mom didn't even really understand the academic system, because she was an immigrant. So, but yeah, I think that it's okay for you to give yourself space to change your mind, and that it's okay, and that you can honor your family and your family's legacy in many, many different ways just by living.
I also think it's important to say that, like, your relationship to your heritage is something you have control over, and that, I think Joe said, like, your parents are just like one tiny window, right, that you have into a world that you're never going to be able to access in the same way that they did, right? I live this too. I don't have to give you all my bio. You can see my skin. Yeah, and like I think it's really something that's been so amazing for me in my late 20s in particular has been like learning Hindi on my own terms, you know, and like getting back into watching Bollywood movies just to like see what that was, you know, like what was that experience I used to have all the time, and like you have control over that, and maybe that's a different way to exercise some sort of like agency and be like bringing something to the table in conversations that otherwise might feel like cultures being imposed, you know, from a particular direction, from a place of expectation. Like these cultures are much bigger than our particular one family lineages are. They just are. And so that's an opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, that was, yeah, I relate to that too as an immigrant child. Does anybody else have a final thought before we close out?
I have a question for Kelsey.
Yes, Coco.
So what do you recommend for like starting this conversation on like abortion access and stuff for people who are maybe pro-life or like have very opposite views of giving access to people of color or anyone, and like, are there good resources, or just like, what's a good way to start this conversation?
Oh, that's a big question. It's a good question. No, I think, you know, it's a process. There's no one right answer. I think that having those conversations with people you have real relationships with is always the best, because you can intuit like entry points into having those conversations based on shared experience. But even if you don't know people and you're trying to have those conversations, I think asking as many open-ended questions as you can and really practicing deep listening to try to get to the root of why people are acting from a place of fear, which I think is often what's happening when it comes to discrimination writ large. It's like a place of fear, a place of not knowing, a place of never having been proximate to that need, or someone who needs something or has a certain identity, and really trying to listen so that you can listen for commonality, even if it doesn't seem like a commonality of like, we both agree abortion's cool now, but even something really basic, like I'm hearing that you are really worried about people when you say like, you don't want people to have abortions. Like, yeah, I can send you some resources too, but I think it's hard. And I think like the one thing that the National Network of Abortion Funds, their like kind of mantra is like, everyone knows someone who's had an abortion. Everyone loves someone who's had an abortion. You just might not know it because they didn't feel safe enough to tell you about it, or they didn't want to tell you about it. And I think really like illuminating that this is normal, and that there are so many data points you can share about how normal it is and how much a part of our history it's always been. As long as people have been able to become pregnant, they've been able to terminate pregnancies, even way before the medical industrial complex existed. So, and yeah, just like looking for those moments and threads of shared humanity, about everyone wanting to live their lives with freedom and to thrive in the ways that they need to.
That's great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was really great. So now we just want to give an opportunity for Joe and Kelsey, and actually anyone who spoke, to give a final thought. So we'll start with Joe and Kelsey, and then we'll open it.
That was, I mean, the last thing you said, Kelsey, that's the shared thread right there. That we want to be able to, without restriction, live our free lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, I just feel like so much of what's come out of this conversation for me is, wow, we can do we can make so many things. We can make meaning together. We can make accountability happen. We can make art. We can make identity. We can engage with that. So I'm feeling like I want to put my hands in some clay right now. And I feel like I did that with all of you a little bit.
Yes to clay. Let's take 2 more final thoughts. Anyone has a final thought?
I'm just really grateful and thankful for this invite, Joe. I think that having us be here as in this conversation where you guys are generations ahead of us and we are the young ones, and to be listened to and understood and to be able to share our stories and be heard, it's something that me personally hasn't been something that I grew up with, and I'm just really grateful that there are people here who are willing to listen and who want to hear our stories.
Thank you for sharing your vulnerability and including us in this. It means a lot.
We are the honored ones. Not many days do we get to share space with such brilliant 19-year-olds or 19-year-olds in general.
Generations? I mean, come on now.
Uh-oh. One more final thought. I see a lot in the chat. Anyone else would like to share vocally?
I also want to thank all the Kelsey, obviously Jerry, Anna, and also all the other Asian American artists who are here and talking. It's great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Awesome. Okay, before we finish this, first order of business is, instead of taking donations for TalkFlock, we would love for Kelsey and Joe to provide any plugs for organizations that need support right now. And they will put that in the chat if they would like. We'll also put it in the follow-up email after this. And was there any other? Yeah, Kelsey.
Can I just say something about my plug, because I changed it based on the course of this conversation?
Yes.
So I just really appreciate everyone leaning into vulnerability and having these conversations about race and Asian identity. And I wanted to point folks toward one of our organizational partners at my job who I love. They're called the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, NAPAWF. And they have chapters all over the country, and they do really amazing reproductive justice organizing, building the power of AAPI women and girls, specifically like around confronting anti-Blackness in the Asian community, and also building with immigrant justice and economic justice partners around like fair wages, ending immigrant detention, expanding abortion access. So I'm gonna put them in the chat. Even if you just follow them on social media, I find my life is enriched by them all the time, so.
That's amazing. Thank you, Kelsey. I can't wait to check it out.
That one.
Wonderful. Jerry, is there anything else you'd like to share before final calendar marking?
I was just the calendar marking, but
Okay.
But also just a lot of gratitude to everybody for speaking, sharing your vulnerability, sharing your heart, sharing your ears. This has been a really wonderful, wonderful night. So thank you all for being a part of it. Anna, you want to do some calendar marking?
Yeah, I also wanted to say I'm really grateful. What a great group. Such a wonderful, thank you for sharing, decentering your own talk, Joe. That was really brilliant. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you for everyone who shared. Really special. I feel very honored. So mark your calendar for August 4th at 7:30 EST, 4:30 PST. Our talkers will be prison abolitionist Rachel Herzing and artist and spiritual theorist / leader Lim Mu. They're amazing, and we hope to see you guys there. We'll send this also in the follow-up email.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really, really great evening. So we hope you can come back. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.